Hello and welcome to another D&D Stories. I am your host, TheWriter. This is the show where I sit here and regale you with all the tabletop gaming stories and remember when something cool happened. So today we return to Conqueror Ken and the Witches 3. As you recall, Conqueror Ken just made allies of the Witches 3 instead of killing them and turning them in for the 5,000 gold bounty, as he is trying to take over the region and become its new warlord, or king, or whatever it is that he has in mind. So he's got an 11% influence over the region, based on the quests that he has done so far, because it's kind of a sandbox, and he needs to make it to 51% to kind of run the place, officially or unofficially. And the major faction that's out there right now is the Wild Children, or the North Storm Druids, as they're known in other regions. But a few other quests go on that aren't especially important to the story. Ken goes after several other bounties to build up his gold and resources. He goes through a brief murder mystery involving a farmer's daughter. He does a couple of small things that I was using to just kind of build him up a little, give him money, give him magic items, give him resources that didn't really progress the story, so we'll kind of gloss over those until one day he receives word that a crypt somewhere in the Circle of Mountains has been taken over by goblins and kobolds. Goblins and kobolds at the same time. And what would cause these two very different factions to work together? It's not really clear, but they've holed up inside the place and nobody dares go inside because of sheer numbers. Because if there's a tribe of goblins, that could be anywhere between, 5 and 500. And if there are kobolds, there could be tunnels in all directions. Again, anywhere between 5 and 500. How big is this crypt? Apparently it's massive, but it's been sealed for so long that nobody's really sure. Now, we've already seen the ruins of a town where the Wild Children take up residence, so this crypt, if it's equally as large, could house any number of dead or undead if we're unlucky. So it's going to be a big dungeon complex, and Ken knows it. So he's got his wand of cure light wounds, and he's got his potions, and he's got all of his eidolon tricks and stuff like that. He makes sure to get like a longbow and arrow and all these other things because he's by himself. So if he walks into the wrong room or walks into the wrong trap, he's done, and he knows it. So over a series of sessions, I was able to teach him that I ain't scared to kill him if he if he starts being clumsy or overconfident. So he stops with his, walk right up to them and talk theories and realizes that everything out here is pretty much out to kill him. So he dispenses with that and goes for a stealthier approach. And he goes to this crypt, this tomb, which is out behind a big stone courtyard that's set up in a semicircle. The broken remains of columns and flower beds that are overgrown are all around him. It must have been some kind of sun god. There's a big sundial in the middle that points to whatever time it is, even with the mountains around, so it's not as effective as it could have been, but it's more for the aesthetic than anything. There's, stained gold and silver paint filigree all over everything that's winding around all the columns and across the floor and stuff like roots or veins. And he sees the twisted goblin totems set up here and there and kobold scratch marks and things like that. So clearly this is a high traffic area, and if there's this many tracks, this might be the only way in and the only way out. But the great stone sealed doors are propped open. One of them is, at least, for a goblin or a kobold to get through. And if you remember, goblins and kobolds are much stronger, or smaller, excuse me, not stronger, jeez. Much smaller than normal men, but goblins have great big round heads, so there is enough room for Ken to kind of squeeze through with him and all his gear. So he has ion torches, which are just torches without flames. They're basically glow sticks, for lack of a better word, and he carries a bunch of them for whenever he's going around places. And he lights up the entryway, but that's where he stops because because of some of his Eidolon abilities and his character build, he has dark vision, so he can see in the dark. And I told him, be careful, Ken. If you're wandering around in the dark, if you have dark vision, if there's no light, there's no color. So you could walk right past a shiny red ruby because it'll only look gray or black to you. So be warned, as long as you're running around in the dark, no color, you might not see things that you would ordinarily see. He's like, all right, cool. He's willing to take the risk because he knows how densely populated this place might be. And Ken, it goes through like a regular crypt. There's worshiping areas for the dead. There's places for offerings. There's plenty of like mausoleum drawer hallways. And the place is pretty heavily trafficked, mostly by goblins. And he runs across goblins here or there, and by then he's level 7, level 8, who are goblins kidding. But the action economy is still a thing, so if there's 10 or 12 goblins, they will give him a run for his money. And I do the Julius Caesar rule. When you get flanked, they get like a +2 to attack you. Well, if there's 4 of them, then they get a +4. If there's 6 of them, they get a +6. And if there's 8 of them, they're surrounding you on all sides, they get a +8 because they're basically gang rushing you from all sides, and there's no defending from that without some kind of supernatural ability. So it's not +2, +2, +2, +2. It's just +8 for everybody, and they use their numbers to their advantage. And Ken is very nearly killed in the first gang rush because he's like, oh, they're goblins, I can take them, until they just surround him with their dog slicers and rusty knives and stuff, and they beat the fuck out of him before he's able to cut them all down. He's like, oh god, that was a mistake, where's my wand of cure light wounds, cure light wounds, cure light wounds, cure light wounds. He uses up like 4 or 5 of them in the meantime. And he looks them over. Of course, there's no loot because goblins are much smaller, so he can't use their armor. He can't really use their weapons. They have a little bit of gold on them, but nothing much in the ways of like serious treasure. This is like the stables from Karazhan. That was kind of his gear check, to make sure he's strong enough to go through here. But he finds them off in pairs after that. He finds a weapons locker sort of area, an armory that's got lots of small weapons in it that's guarded by a female kobold who has an arrow cart. And as soon as she spots him, she yanks the thing his way, because it's on wheels, and she starts like rotating the chambers. And he's like, ah! And he dodges behind a giant stone sarcophagus as it's sprayed with arrows or bolts or whatever. And he's like, where did they get that? How did they get that down here? It's like, there's no telling. Goblins and kobolds do salvage from the caravans that they raid all the time. They may have raided like a small military band or something like that and recovered this arrow cart. So she's basically got a Gatling gun and is holding him off from the armory. And finally, once it's his turn, he's able to like leap over the stone sarcophagus and pull his sword and like whack her arrow cart like right in like one of the gear chambers or something like that to disable it. And she pulls out this crossbow and starts running. They're in this big giant like chamber that's full of stone sarcophagi. And they basically play cowboy, running back and forth between rocks with their pistols. It's hard for anybody to get a shot off on anybody else. Until finally Ken leaps up onto one of the stone sarcophagi and starts shooting down. And he manages to tag her and run forward and like belt her over the head. Because, a kobold with class levels, no doubt ranger or something like that, has more than 4 hit points. So she did not go down very easily. But a couple more goblins come in on a patrol, and he has to take them out as well. It's like the longer he can go without anybody sounding the alarm, the better. But Jesus Christ, she had an arrow cart. And he goes in to like the armory to see if they have anything like worth taking. And they don't really, but it does tell him that they must have a blacksmith or a weaponsmith or something, because they've got like actual well-made iron short swords and like a row of crossbows and a whole row of tiny helmets that would fit their goblin heads and their kobold heads. So they are amassing their strength. They are amassing their arms to defend this crypt that they've broken into, but perhaps to deal with the wild children later. Who knows? If this place is like a hotbed for faction wars, you never know what's going on. But goblins and kobolds would have sheer numbers. They would just need gear to back up their small bodies. But he goes into this armory. It looks like they've been stockpiling weapons and armor for a while now. So having killed the kobold that runs the arrow cart in front of the armory, he's able to move on. And eventually he comes to like a checkpoint, like a guard checkpoint. It's a very small room. There's a couple of guards there, goblins that are like playing cards and yibber-yabbering in goblinese, rockety-doo, blah, like they say in the early Diablo games. And he notices that a female kobold in like a toga thing comes in with a serving tray, and she serves out what food and what drink she's got, and they like slap her on the ass as she's going by, and he decides he's gonna follow this servant for a while. And then he sees another servant, and then another, and then another, and he starts to kind of put it together that, with rare exception, it looks like all the kobold here are female, and they've all been placed into like subservient positions, that the goblins have like either captured the kobold tribe, or they are running the place through sheer numbers or something like that. He doesn't see any like any male kobold running around anywhere, and he sees that all the females have been made into servants. And the reason he can do this without getting caught is, again, because Ken can turn invisible, and he exploits the fuck out of that spell. And I was like, the second you do anything or disturb something or anything, I'm going to say, oh, they see you. So he's very, very careful, but he gathers a lot of information. And he eventually emerges out into like this chapel area that has like hallways that go off in other directions. And he's like, how freaking big is this place? Because this crypt spider webs in all directions. If this circle of mountains used to be like a kingdom or something, this must have been like their main crypt, because he's been through room after room after hall, all devoted to kind of like the same sun god, but the sheer number of mausoleum drawers and sarcophagus rooms and things like that would make even like Diablo blush. Like the obnoxious number of dead people here is noticeable. But he comes across like this church chapel area, a high ceilinged room that is meant to make you feel small, because that's how religion works. And it's covered with broken pews, and it's got a big dais with a missing lectern, and there's goblins and kobolds like strewn about every which way, eating, playing darts, laughing, cajoling, getting into arguments, and sharpening their knives and doing all this different stuff. This is like a big like nesting area, a big living area, and he observes much the same. All the kobolds are female, there are no males about. And the goblins kind of treat the kobolds like second-class citizens. And after a while, he figures out, clearly this is not like a symbiotic relationship. This is a parasitic relationship. So maybe he can stir the pot on this one. So he follows one of the servants until she goes into like a supply room, like a pantry or something. And After the door is closed and she's like refilling her servant tray and stuff, looking pretty miserable, she's even got like an iron collar on. So this is clearly slavery. And Ken reveals himself and like clamps his hands over her long lizard muzzle and is like, don't scream, don't scream. Don't scream. Do you speak common? Don't scream. I'm not going to hurt you. And he does his best diplomacy, and she does her best sense motive. And she promises not to scream. And through a long conversation of like broken common, because not all kobolds are bilingual. They speak kobold, and that's about it. But she speaks in broken common, and he is able to find out from her that both the kobold and the goblins live in this giant crypt area because there's enough space for everybody, but they live by law of the horde. And the law of the horde is whoever is the strongest runs everything. So if the strongest living thing in here is a goblin, the goblins run everything. So if the strongest living thing in here is a kobold, the kobolds run everything. But with their superior arms and their superior armors and stuff like that, the goblins are the ones running the show, and the kobolds have not had the chance to retaliate. So they've basically been enslaved. Their similar philosophies have kind of worked in the goblins' favor because they're more about like the guerrilla warfare. They carry bigger weapons. Kobolds are better known for working like traps and in groups in like more militarized fashion, but the goblins in like a one-on-one fight outdo them at almost every turn. So he finds out, that the male kobolds have all been locked away in like a certain wing of the crypt, and they are not allowed to come out because, Big Gob Gob says so, and he is the law around here because he's the strongest. So Ken gets it into his head that if he were to kill Big Gob Gob and free the male kobold and kind of even out the odds around here, maybe he could get some help fighting the wild children. And I was like, oh shit, he's going to start a faction war. And I didn't expect this because that would mean that the campaign would end pretty quickly. But, points for creativity. So Ken, after assuring this servant girl that he's not going to hurt any kobold, that he doesn't have to, swears her to silence, and then goes and turns invisible again to keep exploring the place. And she goes off and he watches her for a while and she doesn't say a word, but she does go to the other female kobold servants. They basically have like a dorm area where there's like 9 or 10 of them, and they all hang out in one spot when they're not serving or sharpening weapons or doing whatever the goblins tell them to. You kind of get the feeling, with the iron collars, that their life is just miserable right now, and the goblin warlord that's running all this is keeping things that way so that his tribe will always be on top. They came together to be symbiotic and kind of look after each other because, goblins and kobolds, they have a challenge rating of 1/3 or 1/2 or something like that. So any roving group of adventurers could pick them off. But, with their powers combined, they would serve as a deadly fighting force. Especially in an enclosed area with such sheer numbers, etc., etc. But they have not militarized just yet because the goblins are enjoying their seniority or their rank over the kobolds for now. So Ken keeps going through a series of places, and there's not as many traps here because they've kind of like taken the place apart. They've pulled all the gold necklaces off the statues. They've pried open as many of the mausoleum drawers as they can. They've desecrated thousands of corpses looking for heirlooms and silvery rings and all the different things that people would bury with their dead. There's death shrouds that are serving as curtains in certain places. So the place has kind of been cleaned out in terms of traps and treasure. They are in the hands of the goblins and the kobold. But he wanders deeper until he finds like a hall of heroes, like a place that was just for folks who defended the crown or who died for the crown, things like that. And it's this series of like less than 20 people. And the mausoleum drawers are like sealed with like liquid metal. Like they couldn't like take a chisel to it and open it. Is the stone is too thick and the metal is too strong. So there's scratch marks all over everything, but they couldn't get in. And Ken, obviously, he does the sense magic to see if there's anything worth taking, because it's an old crypt, but it's not his religion. Not that he has a religion; he's neutral evil. But he finds a magic necklace, I think, in one of them that prevents fall damage or something like that. It would subtract 1d6 from falling damage. So I guess that was a ring of snowfall, or a necklace of snowfall. So he breaks into this mausoleum drawer and pulls it off the neck of this skeleton. Dusts it off and puts it on. It's like, great job, you're grave robbing. What alignment are you again? Lawful evil. Well, now you're neutral evil, because you're grave robbing. Idiot. So Ken, and I want to be super clear on this, even if this campaign sounds really short, because it's a one-person campaign, that Ken was not a heroic character. He was neutral evil from all the various things that he was willing to do to kind of get his way and to get that influence percentage up. Broke into this poor woman's resting place and stole her necklace and put it on, but whatever. He is again beset upon by goblins, and he takes them out after a few rounds, but this place isn't so much about the combat as it is about, like, weaving this story. But he kills a number of goblins as he goes along, until finally he comes across, like, a great big room that would probably be, like, the size of, like, a ballroom. It's got lots of columns and a big dais with a throne of skulls and bones on it, and atop it sits a goblin that is far larger than the rest. He's got like an actual iron sword next to him instead of like a small dog slicer and stuff like that. So he's probably got like levels of fighter or barbarian on him. And between Ken and this guy up on the throne is just a monstrous party of goblins, like milling about every which way. There's long tables with food. They're playing dice and games of chance, and they're wrestling and throwing darts, and have they like turned a table on its side and painted a target on it, so they got throwing axes, like right as a servant kobold goes by, and you almost slice off her tail tip doing throwing axes. Stupid servant, get out of the way. Stuff like that. Just this huge like orgy party of nonsense of all these different goblins every which way. And yeah, there are some kobolds being used as sex slaves, and of course he's the big gob who's up on the throne has a quartet of she kobold, like fanning him with the feathered fan, and one of them's got like the serving tray and stuff like that, and one of them's like draped across his lap naked and stuff like that. So he's living the high life, and he's letting his guys enjoy themselves. This faction war takeover must not have been too long ago, because he's still celebrating with his soldiers. And Ken kind of stays in the shadows for a while. Like, the doors are wide open. Both, like, the big double doors are wide open. So he saw all the torches. He could smell the food. He could smell the goblins. He could smell them. As he's sneaking along, and he's like, okay, if I just run up and stab him, I'll reveal myself to probably what amounts to hundreds of goblins all at the same time. But the leader needs to be taken out. And he kind of like thinks about it for a while. He puts like thumb and forefinger, and then, he moves aside. He's still invisible. He moves aside as more servants come through with more food, and they set him up on the table, and they dive bomb onto this food, and there's pieces and chicken legs flying every which way. It's like, if I publicly challenge him and kill him, though, by the law of the Horde for the goblins and the kobold, I'd be in charge, now wouldn't I? And I go, yeah, probably, if you can get up there. You know, there's like 200 goblins and then the kobold servants between you and him. And he's like, I'll just walk in. Like, he's been doing this all campaign and getting his ass kicked because he approached the wild children and they kicked his ass. And he approached a bounty and got his ass kicked. And he approaches... I don't know what his thing was where Ken would just, like, try to use words with people that wanted him dead. Like, there's nobody here, Ken, that's gonna be your friend. This is a hotbed for faction wars and for everybody out for themselves, and you're trying to build up influence by killing people. You know, you're neutral evil as it is. You know, nobody here is gonna want to negotiate. But sure enough, you know, invisible, he walks down the middle aisle, you know, trying not to get run over by goblins that are wrestling or laughing or throwing food every which way. This is a wild cacophony that's going on around him. But he makes it all the way to the bottom of the dais, and he reveals himself to Big Gob Gob, who immediately jumps up in surprise, you know, spilling his female servant out across the floor, and all four of them scamper away, squealing. And the room kind of goes quiet because suddenly there's a tall two-legs up in front of King Gob Gob, and they're halfway with food to their mouths with throwing axes and darts, and some of them are starting to reach for their dog slicers. And he's like, King Gob Gob, I challenge you for the... What did he say? God. Maybe it was just I challenge you. I challenge you for the right of authority over the goblins and the kobold. By law of the Horde, you must accept. Or are you too much of a pussy? And he shouts really loudly so everybody can hear. And of course, King Gob Gob kind of looks around. He's got all of his servants, all of his goblin compatriots watching him. So if he says no, he automatically loses. And this tall two-legs will take over his throne, take over his spot. Because that's how Law of the Horde works. You either have to accept a challenge or you automatically lose. So he steps up, he's got his longsword, which to a goblin is like an obnoxious, like, cloud sword. It weighs more than he does, it's longer than his whole body, but he somehow learned to wield a proper longsword. And the goblins make like a big space, and there's plenty of like broken furniture and things for them to use as their battleground. And I go, this is it. This is where this campaign fucking falls apart. All right, you know, roll initiative. And they roll initiative, and the goblin wins. And he's like, barbarian rage! And suddenly his muscles all just explode with size, and he grows like 2 feet tall. He's almost as tall as Ken is. And, you know, his strength stat almost doubles out. And all these other things, and you can see like his chiseled abs. You could grind meat on those abs. And suddenly the sword doesn't seem too much bigger than he is, and Ken's like, oh fuck. And they charge at each other and cross swords, spraying sparks out across the crowd, who immediately start cheering and laughing and pointing and throwing food every which way, because they're goblins and they're crazy. And Ken doesn't really use any magic during this fight. He wants it to be like a quote-unquote fair fight or fair duel, and none of the goblins interfere. But eventually, because, you know, he's a goblin, you know, barbarian or not, Ken is able to slay the beast and send his head flying across the dais, across his own throne, where one of the servant girls, one of the kobolds, just kind of like lightly kicks it out amongst the crowd. And, you know, blood-stained with a bloody sword, you know, Ken like lifts his sword high. Ah! By law of the Horde, I am your leader now. Bow before me! And there's a silence throughout the room. And slowly some of the servants kind of get down on their knees and they bow forward. And the goblins look at each other, and like the dog slicers start coming down, and the food starts getting dropped, and the throwing axes are kind of set down. And they all, like, get on their knees and bow before him. You know, the new leader of the Horde, the new leader of the goblins and the kobolds, is this tall two-legs who came in and destroyed King Gob Gob. You Where's his crown? Oh, it's still on his head. I wear the crown. I am the king goblin now, or I'm the king of the goblins and the kobolds now. This faction belongs to me. And I was like, oh god, he erased a faction leader. Okay. We were going to come back to him later, but he decided to go for the direct route. I was like, alright, it's 2 factions that you just came in on. Roll me 2d20 for your influence going up, because you're commanding something to the tune of 1,200 goblins and kobold combined. So like 600 of both. I was like, roll me 2d20s, and he rolls them out. He ends up at like 42% influence. I was like, Jesus fuck, alright. It's going to be a much shorter campaign than I thought. And that was on top of the other bounties and the murder mystery and everything, so it might have been closer to like 45 or 46. But he's getting real close to that magic 51% that he needs to kind of take over the region. And now he has an army of kobolds and goblins at his command, because their hierarchy was so simple that he exploited it. I was like, hey, you're the king of the goblins and the king of the kobold as well. You can expect a lot of duels in your future, but for the moment, you command both factions. And he goes, I sit on the throne of skulls. The throne of skulls and bones. And I was like, the servant girl kobolds immediately come over to like fan you and give you beef jerky and a goblet of wine and stuff. And like nothing has happened, the party resumes. Like they go back to their throwing axes, target practice, and their darts and their dice and their food and their wrestling and their servant fucking and everything else. And it's like, there's a new guy on the throne. Okay, back to the party, yeah! But, he eventually sees the kobold servant that told him how this place kind of works, that told him about King Gobgob. And he motions for her to come over, and she comes to, like, sit on her legs before him. And she goes, by order of the new king, your new king, I want you to go and release all the male kobold from wherever they're being held, and they are free to go about as they please, like the goblins now. Make it so! And do not return until you have done this. And he's trying to be regal, but he's coming across like a goober. And she looks ecstatic, and all the other servant girls look ecstatic, and they run all the way down. New king says so, throw the bar off the door and, undo the padlock and the chain. They were holding the male kobolds, like, off in, like, another wing of the crypt, but they'd sealed it off, and they were just, like, putting food under the door and stuff, and it was really unhygienic, and they all smelled terrible. But they released this big crowd of male kobold that flooded out over the entire crypt. And they came to see the new king of the kobold, the new king of the goblins, and they were shocked to find that it was Tall Two Legs. But if he had killed King Gobgob and had released them so that they were free and equal once again, the metal collars start coming off. They freed them from this slavery, from this imprisonment, that they would be equal citizens once again. He was probably going to be a better king than the last guy, so they all bow before him. And I go, King Gobgob, or just, I guess, king of the goblins and kobolds, whatever you want to call yourself, you've got free pics of the girls. And he goes, what? And he goes, yeah, there's female goblins and female kobold. Do you want any of that? And he's like, no, I don't. I was like, just checking. But he's like, shut up. But eventually it came to the point where he kind of like rallied his forces, his goblins and his kobold, into the biggest room he could come across, which was the ballroom with the throne. And he'd bring everybody in here. And he's like, we are to make war with the wild children, another faction of Tall Two Legs, much like myself, but they wield evil nature magic, woo, and he tries to make them sound scary and evil and stuff like that. And they have big dogs, but you have dog slicers, and you will be victorious, and we will take over their land, and we will run this ruined town, and we will take all their shinies. And he talks it up with this big charismatic speech. Now gather up your armors, gather up your goblin dogs, gather up your spears and your arrow carts if we have any more of those. We go to war! And I was like, oh god, this has spiraled out of control. And Ken takes the goblins and he takes the kobolds, every last one of them that is of fighting age and able body, and they pour out of this old crypt, and they don't really march in any kind of formation. They're just a giant group. And it's like, okay, it's a few days to the home of the wild children, the ruined town, and he shows them where it is on a map, and he picks some commanders and he picks some lieutenants so that everybody knows where they're going. It's like they're just going to rush over them like a barbarian horde and win by sheer numbers. And win by sheer numbers they do. A couple of days later, they reach the lip of the valley, and there's a couple of guard towers that see them coming and raise the alarm, but it doesn't matter because there's maybe 50 or 60 wild children, along with a dozen or so more of those dire wolves, plus their leader, who hangs out around the middle of town, around the bonfire. But sheer enough numbers of 1,200 or so goblins and kobolds mixed together, thrilled and fighting for their new charismatic king, they wash over the wild children, and it's not even a battle. It's a one-sided slaughter. Like, Ken barely gets any time to do any fighting himself. This is kind of the nature of a Kingmaker campaign. Like, once you've built up enough political influence, you're not the one doing the fighting. You're the one doing the commanding. So a force of 1,200 rushes over a force of 50 or 60. Yeah, you can imagine how it went. Even if they have levels of fucking druid or fighter or ranger or whatever it happens to be. You can rage all you want, but you can't kill the beast. So they wash the wild children, the North Storm druids, and their leader too. Ken doesn't even get to fight his leader. Like, he thought there would be some kind of dramatic, duel to the death, leader versus leader. No, he gets pulled down in the crowd like everybody else. Like the dog he is. And the goblins cut down all the dire wolves, and they make these massive throw rug blankets out of them. And there's 12 heads, so the 12 commanders, the 12 lieutenants, whatever he's got, they all get like dire wolf head like furs that go over their heads. So if they've got the big ears on them, which is hilarious. And the goblins and the kobolds and Conqueror Ken are victorious. And I was like, okay, you have wiped out the wild children, also called the North Storm druids. You have wiped them out with sheer numbers, and the goblins are like breaking open all the basement areas and like underground locations that were standing even though the town was a ruin. Any building that had a basement, they were using as like hideouts and housing and stuff like that. They're all rushing down into the basements, coming out with food and gold and shiny things and weapons and all kinds of great loot and treasure, and they're throwing it all in a big pile to present to their king, because this was a one-sided butt fucking is what it was. So, look at all this loot we got. Long live the kobold king. Long live the goblin king. Kobold, goblin, kobold, goblin. I'm king of you both. Shut up. So they've got this massive pile of treasure that could not possibly fit on any cart or vehicle. It's like, all right, everybody take some. This is our first of many victories. And finally he suddenly realizes, wait, what about the witches 3? I was going to invite them to this battle. Shit. Well, I should probably go visit them later and let them know what's going on. And I go, okay, you've annihilated a faction, so there's a big power vacuum. Roll me another d20 to see how much your influence goes up. He rolls like a 15. So it goes from like 45 or 46 up to 60. and the minimum number is 51, and I say, Conqueror Ken, you are now in such a position that your word of your deeds has traveled far and wide in the circle of mountains. You run the place now, pretty much. There's a number of like smaller factions around, but the greater majority is yours, with the goblins and the kobold providing you with sheer numbers and the power of the witches of Hawk Rock. More than half of the circle of mountains, the lands, the trees, the rolling hills, and the lakes, they belong to you now. And he's like, yes, I'm in charge. And he's like, I wonder if I could seduce the 3 witches into being my concubines or witches or wives or whatever. And it's like, well, there's a big difference between being a wife and being a concubine, so you're going to have to make that decision later. But the kobolds and the goblins raid the place, and they gather up all the shinies and treasures and things like that, and they start, like, hauling it all back to the crypt location where they were. And Conqueror Ken, he takes the helmet off of the leader of the wild children, the druids of the storm, and he puts it on himself, so he's got, like, this great big, like, antler helmet thing, and he takes off the guy's like silver rings and silver amulet, and he puts them on himself. Is like the blood of thine enemies is all over him from this great big pitched battle. He's got anyway, it was absolute chaos, and he basically won the game right there with the destruction of the wild children. So Conqueror Ken lived for many more years, slowly snuffing out the other factions that lived within the circle of mountains. With the magical power of the witches at his command, all he had to do was really pay them. With the armies of the goblins and the kobolds at his command, anybody who didn't join him under his banner was eventually snuffed out, and he ruled unchallenged to the end of his days. The end. So, Conqueror Ken was, again, not a good character, not a heroic character, but a kingmaker character, a Game of Thrones character. He was there to gather power, gather influence, kill anybody in his way, and eventually made his way to the top. And I know that sounded like a short campaign, but like I said, there were other small bounties, small things that he did along the way. Those were just kind of the main events that happened. But man, once he took control of the goblins and the kobolds, it was kind of over, He got an army and destroyed the wild children. I was expecting that to be like an infiltration mission where he would like go in and try to kill the leader of the wild children and have this big epic duel. No, he went and got an army and crushed him that way. I was like, all right, well, that's one way to do it. So, even with the casualties that came with fighting 50 or 60 people with druid levels and ranger levels, they came out relatively unscathed just because they were a giant fucking horde that rushed over the lip of the valley and overtook them. But Conqueror Ken and his forces were more than victorious. They were absolutely victorious. They took over the entire region in just a few months, in just a few years' time, and there was no one left to oppose them. So, setting up a structure of power with the factions that joined him, including the Witches 3, he ruled unchallenged. So he won. He became the leader of the Circle of Mountains. So that was a pretty good campaign, I thought. It was relatively short, and it gave us a reason for why the North Storm never came knocking during the 12 Trees campaign. They got wiped out by Conqueror Ken and his giant army of kobolds and goblins. Just imagine 600 lizard people and 600 bowling ball-headed assholes coming over the hill to crush you and everybody you ever knew or loved. But, yeah, the North Storms were annihilated like 50 years ago. That's why they never swung by during 12 Trees. So that answers that, I suppose. But that was the end of that campaign, and I guess that will be the end of this D&D story. Keep gaming.
Hi guys, T here. Remember to hit that like button for me on your way out. If you'd like to see artwork and maps from my gaming table, check out the D&D Stories Facebook page. Also, I have a Patreon if you'd like to toss a few gold pieces into your humble bard's hat. Links in the description below. Keep gaming!